Hi all, how you all doing?
Hi.
Hey. Just wait a couple of minutes for people to join. I'm afraid I've had to leave my window open, so you're very likely to hear some more chicken noises. So I'll apologize for that straight up. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to be using link. Using this. Right, should we start? So thank you all for coming. Today I'm going to be talking about annotations and IIIF. And this is my favorite part of IIIF, as you'll probably see in the later examples. The image API and the presentation API are brilliant for making things available and making them interoperable. But these annotations really bring the content alive and are really good at kind of getting people interacting in your content, researching into your content, and there are many use cases that annotations support. We've seen a number of these in the course so far, including transcribing documents, which we'll be doing today. You can also use it for commenting. So if somebody's annotated an item, you might want to comment on the annotation and have a discussion about it. Also for highlighting areas, like handwritten annotations in a printed book. I can link to another workshop we did when we did the DHSI one, looking at some artificial intelligence that will pick out handwritten annotations from a printed work. But that sort of thing is really interesting. And then also we saw yesterday that annotations can be used to explain content in either exhibitions or teaching through things like stories. And we also saw yesterday that how fundamental annotations are to IIIF, in that Mike was showing you that we have this canvas and we annotate images onto the canvas. And almost all of the stuff we do with annotations follows something called a W3C annotation model, which is a public web specification for annotating things in general. So it can be for commenting on websites or for commenting on different types of material. But we've kind of customized it to work with IIIF and to work with IIIF images. And Mike showed you this image yesterday. But if we're looking at an annotation, it's kind of got three components. the annotation itself, it's got a body and a target. And if we look at examples of a body might be a text transcription of a line. It might be a video giving a background or a talk about painting. And also in the IIIF case, it might be a IIIF image, which is painted on the canvas. And the target in the IIIF case is either a whole canvas, it could also be a whole manifest, or also could be a region of a canvas, or a region of an image. And if we have a look at an example annotation, we can see this kind of reflects that diagram in that we've got this bit here, which is all about the annotation. We've got the resource, which is the body, and the on, which is the target. So this example, the annotation, it says here it's an annotation type, and it has OA, which means open annotation. I'll talk about that in a bit. It has an ID. Ideally, this would be an ID that is dereferenceable, so you could put that into the browser and you'd be able to get this annotation back. But it doesn't have to. It's a may rather than a must. It also has this concept of a motivation. So this particular annotation is a special IIIF annotation, and it's saying that I want to paint this image on this canvas. And so the motivation allows you to differentiate between different types of annotation. And then this is the body resource. And in this particular case, it's saying this IIIF image is the body of the annotation, and we're targeting it at the canvas, and this is the canvas ID. A transcribing annotation is much smaller and simpler, but it has the same sort of structure. So we have the annotation information, so the ID, the type, which is again open annotation, and the motivation this time is commenting rather than painting. And this identifies this annotation as a different type of annotation to the painting IIIF one. For this one, we have a body, which is just text, and it says Zeus seated on stool throne. And the target this time is slightly different. So this part, the highlighted bit of the canvas, this is the canvas ID. And then we've got an XY width height, which gives us a box. So when we look at this image, and you can see the image here, is this coin here on the right-hand side. And this annotation is saying that I'm drawing a box around this coin, and I'm saying that this is a Zeus sitting on the throne. And it's a XY width height, very similar to the way that we identify IIIF images in the region. So it's X, which is a number of pixels from the left, Y from the number of pixels from the top, and then the width and height to do this box around this particular image. So far I've talked about open annotations, but with version 3 of IIIF, they're moving to web annotations. Open annotations was the thing that came before web annotations, and is still a standard, but it's not at the level of a web standard, a W3C standard. So the W3C standard is much more official and supported around different areas. So the difference is the JSON is slightly different. So we still have this part of the annotation, we still have the body, and we still have the target. But you can see that they're called different things. More helpfully this time, it's called body rather than resource, and target rather than on. So it matches much better to the diagram I showed up above. Is there a question? So how do you decide for painting or commenting? Is there a set vocabulary? Yes, there is. So if I go to the W3C annotation model, on here, there is a list of motivations. So these are the standard annotation motivations. Painting is one that IIIF defines. So you'll only really see that in IIIF manifests. But commenting is a standard W3 annotation describing, there's lots of different ones. So a question, how does using painting or commenting motivation change the rendering of the annotation in the viewer? So a painting one, we'll put it on top of the canvas. So if it was text painting, you'd see the the canvas and the text will be written on the canvas. If it's an annotation commenting or one of the other motivations, there'll be a box on the canvas and you'd put your mouse over the box to see the annotation. So we can see an examples when we go on to the next stage with Mirador. But generally, you'll only see the painting annotations within the IIIF manifest. So almost all of the annotations I'm going to talk about from now on will be different motivations, not painting. So the changes between the W3C annotations and open annotations can be seen there. But from now on, I'm going to stick with the open annotations, which is available in version 2. And then another bit of terminology is this annotation lists. And this is just a list of annotations. So you could have an annotation list per page. So if you're transcribing a page, you put all of the lines of the annotation into an annotation list. And the annotation list is just something to group together annotations. And we'll be working with this in a bit. So the next stage is to have a look at Mirador and the annotation features. But before I go on, are there any other questions? So I'm going to demo this, and then if you want to have a, could you give a web link to the W3C list, of course? Ben's already got it there, great. So for this exercise, we're going to use Mirador and just have a look at the annotation functionality. So I'm going to do it first, and then if you want to follow the guide on here, we'll have about 5 minutes maybe, and you can have a look and a quick play, and then you can come back and have a longer play later. So I'm going to split this into 2 screens, so hopefully I can still see the instructions. In fact, I'm going to do it this way. So hopefully you can see my screen where I've got Mirador at the bottom and just the exercise at the top. So the first stage is to click on this link to open Mirador. So that's what I've got at the bottom. And by default, it opens up these 2 screens. And I'm going to close one of them. So what I did is I clicked the cross at the top, which closed one of them. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to replace the object. So I'm going to go to these 4 squares at the top left, and I'm going to click Replace Object. And just choose an item that you want to, you like the look of, to start annotating. I'm going to start this one. So we've selected a manifest that we want to annotate, and now we're ready to start annotating. So to be able to annotate in Mirador, there is this speech bubble at the top left again. I'm going to click that, and it creates a annotation toolbar. And Ben showed this on Monday, but there are lots of different options for creating different sizes and shapes of annotations. But I'm going to stick with just a rectangle annotation. And I can see I've already done some here. This is my favorite picture. But I'm just going to draw a box here. And then I'm going to type in my annotation here. There's also this tagging feature. It doesn't link to any controlled vocabulary or anything, but if you were installing your own instance of Mirador, you could enforce your own use of these tags to create that sort of vocabulary. So then I'm going to click Save. And what you'll see that is my annotation has been saved on top of this image. So just quickly to go back to the difference between the painting and transcribing commenting annotations. The painting annotation, if I painted on this is my annotation, you'd actually see it written on top of the image. Whereas these kind of other types of annotations are on top of the image. So the question is, where is the annotation saved? And I'll come on to that. I will come back to that. So there's some information here on the different options that you can use for your annotations, with some information about what they all do. And then when you are actually editing your annotation, there are all these options on the top for making it bold, italics, to link to other things. So maybe I want to link to Wikipedia for this particular image. And maybe I want to insert an image. So maybe I want to annotate this image with another image. And also you can annotate it with a video. So I'll pause there and let you have a go at playing around. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat and I'll answer them. Your question about where the annotation is stored is just next, so I won't spoil it just yet. And Ben, do you want to mention the Vatican controlled vocabulary?
Oh, I was just going to provide an example of something out in the wild with controlled vocabulary set up for a specific project, just the variety of things that could be done with it. Nothing more than that.
Thanks. I think I've seen somewhere where they do control this a lot more, but I can't think where that is. Does this totally restrict you from using certain tags?
No, you can freeform, but we've got built into their Mirador instance a drop-down list of controlled vocabulary for the tags. Mm-hmm.
Great. A question, can I repeat step 2, how you replace the images in Mirador? Yeah, of course. So at the top left, there are the 4 squares. And if you highlight over there, hover over there, there's the option to replace object. So I click that. And then I had the list of manifests. And I just clicked on one of the images. And that opened the manifest. So question, if I wanted to add an image, for instance, a source, how would you do that? So if I was going to do that as an annotation, you can see I've annotated most of these through various demos. So I could say this image is my copy, but it comes from, and I could paste a link in here to say Wikipedia. I think I would probably put in a link. Excuse my spelling. This is the source. And then you can see it appears like that. So that's probably how I do it. Is there a demo that will let you paint an annotation rather than comment? So there isn't, as far as I know, a way to do this through any sort of client. And the way I see most of the paintings is through the kind of creation of the manifest. And I suppose you could say that the Bodleian manifest editor is doing that, painting annotations. But it's, yeah, that's probably the best way. Does that help, Robson? Great. So the purpose of this is just to have a look around and get familiar with the annotation functionality. Is everyone ready to move on? Is there a way to edit the size of the image, or does that need to be done beforehand? So the size of the image overall is, if you're annotating with an image, oh, okay. I think it would probably be needed to be done beforehand. You could insert a link to a IIIF image, and then you'll be able to resize it when you put it in the URL here. But otherwise, I think you would have to do that beforehand. Okay, so the good question that was asked was, where is this stored? And this particular instance is the demo version of Mirador. And this uses something called the local storage, which is part of your web browser. So if I was to open this link in Chrome, I'm using Firefox here, but if I was to open it up in Chrome, I wouldn't be able to see my annotations. And if I sent this link to somebody else, they also wouldn't be able to see my annotations. They're only on this browser on my machine. And also, they're not necessarily persistent. I couldn't give you a definitive answer because some of these annotations I've done quite a while ago, but I wouldn't rely on these. Actually, these ones are part of the image. But some of the other annotations I've noticed have kind of stayed around. But really, this is a setup of a demo, and the local storage is perfect for that, and it can show you how the annotation functionally works, but isn't really what you need to be able to share and store your annotations. So the question is, how do we make these annotations more permanent? And the answer is to use an annotation store, which is the next part. So there are a number of IIIF annotation stores available. And if you go to this link, there's a whole list of them. So Annotation Service, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 options to choose from. Annotate was developed by Jack Reed, who gave the presentation on Tuesday on AI. And is that what you're using, Ben, in Stanford?
Oh, we've got that set up for a couple of projects, yeah. And we've got your simple annotation server running for some others. And
do you also have Elucidate?
We don't have that installed yet that I know of.
Okay. So Annotate is one. Elucidate is written by Digerati, who wrote the Universal Viewer and do a lot of stuff with IIIF. So that's it's open source, but they also offer hosting options for that one. And then the Simple Annotation Server, which I wrote, which we're going to be using today. But just to flag up that I don't have as much time as I would want to maintain this. So please do use it with caution. But I do like to use it as a demonstration because it not only implements the annotation functionality, it also implements the IIIF Search API. So I'm going to use it to demonstrate both of those features. So for this example, we're going to use a hosted version of the Simple Annotation Server. And this is one that I'm running. And we're also going to use the Welsh Book of Remembrance, which is a crowdsourcing project we ran using Mirador a number of years ago. And just as an aside, there was a question about DOIs, digital object identifiers, that came up in the presentation section. When I worked at National Library of Wales, we created these handle links. This handle link should reference to this viewer link. I noticed when I was testing this earlier that unfortunately it's not quite working. It is, brilliant. So we had a digital object identifier for the presentation, the HTML page, the public version of this digital object, and we created a DOI for that. We decided not to create a DOI for the manifest because we felt that was a presentation of the resource rather than a key part of the digital object in itself. We would create DOIs for the more persistent metadata formats like METs, Dublin Core, and some other metadata standards. We would create a DOI for that, but we wouldn't create one for the manifest. Partly because we didn't think people would use it, and also that we didn't want to tie ourselves to persisting the manifest. And just to say that IIIF is aiming for presentation and not necessarily for preservation. Although saying that, the manifest links, if they don't exist anymore, then your presentation won't work anymore. And there are instances where people take your manifest and start annotating it. And if your manifest was to just disappear, and then all of the annotations wouldn't work. So there is a kind of commitment to keep your manifest URLs around as long as possible, but we didn't create a DOI for that. So back to the exercise. So just checking questions. Is it possible to store annotations for permanent services to others? And if so, where would these be stored? Yes. So I will show you that's part of this tutorial. So you'll see that as it comes up. So this particular example is using, as I say, the Book of Remembrance, which is a list of everybody who passed away in the First World War, who was either born in Wales or had some connection to Wales. And I'm sure Alison knows this book. It was part of the World War I commemoration remembrance services. And the idea was that they would get the community to transcribe the book as an act of remembrance, and also to kind of create this resource which would then be searchable for everybody. And so what we did is we implemented it using Mirador. And the purpose of this demonstration is to get some experience of how you could customize Mirador for your crowdsourcing projects, and also to see this kind of annotation server in action. So if you click on this link, we'll move this to the window. So this Book of Remembrance has many chapters, and if you can choose one of these chapters, Mirador 2 doesn't work awfully well if there are multiple people transcribing the same page at the same time. So if you can try and pick a random one, and hopefully somebody else will be picking a different one, and also one that hasn't been used before. Great. So what we asked the volunteers to do was to create these boxes around a line of text. And we customized the input of the annotation so that we could ask for particular fields to be filled in. So if we just transcribe it first. And then I'm going to type the annotations. So if I highlight second lieutenant and say that is a rank, the name and the DSO is a medal. So I'm going to save that annotation. And you can see that it saved it to the annotation store here. Because we're using my hosted annotation store, if any of you go to this page, you'll be able to see my annotation. And if you're looking at this page already and it's not appeared, you can click this refresh button, which will make sure that this annotation appears. So in some ways, this answers the persistent question because the annotations are stored in this annotation store. You can share this with others, but this particular instance is read-write. So all of you can edit my annotation and delete it. So this will be good for some use cases, but not good for other use cases. And the next stage of the process is to be able to download these annotations and link them to your manifest so that they're read-only. But this is an example of a read-write annotation server. This one's open to the public. So yeah, but most annotation stores require some sort of authentication. But as this is a demo one for these sort of trainings, it's open to everybody. So if you want to have a quick go at that and let me know how you get on. There's a step-by-step guide. I created my box, I did my typing, and then I highlighted it and clicked the button to say what the particular things were. And if you could let me know when you've created a few annotations, I'll move on. You having a problem? So it's not letting you color the annotations. It turns everything red or black. Yeah, I mean, we had a few issues with this. I will tell you the truth. So because what we're doing here is we're kind of highlighting them in HTML. And so sometimes it doesn't work always quite right. So if you do type first, and then do the highlighting, it tends to work better. But if not unreasonably, you click one and then you click another, it gets a bit confused, and that's potentially what's happened here. Has anyone managed to do an annotation? Great, Sally has. Anyone else? Great. Brilliant. So as I say, this is just to show kind of some of the customization possibilities, but I will also say some of the issues that it created when we ran this project. So first, it's not easy. And feel for the volunteers that did over 1,000 pages of these transcriptions. It took about 6 months to a year for people to do this work. And they enjoyed the process, but I think they struggled with the way some of the Mirador kind of handled the annotations. And I think generally Mirador is brilliant for maybe annotating a small amount of resources for Mirador 2, I should say. It was brilliant for kind of the research use case, which it was intended for. It wasn't great for this kind of crowdsourcing use case that we were trying to use it for. And there were things like some people had difficulty with creating the boxes. It takes quite a lot of hand-eye coordination and computer literacy to be able to get that kind of box drawing, and a lot of people struggled with it. And also the version of Mirador that we were using, it wasn't possible to edit the boxes once you did it. So the version that you've been playing is a lot easier than our poor volunteers were forced to use. So just to think of this, if you navigate to somebody else's section, you should be able to see somebody else's annotation. But if we took this manifest and it's here, and we took it to Project Mirador and tried to open it, we wouldn't see the annotations. And the reason for that is that this version of Mirador is configured to use this hosted annotation server. So if we send the link to this particular version of Mirador to somebody, they can view the annotations, but we can't take this manifest to another Mirador and see the annotations because they're just on this instance of Mirador. And if we take it to the universal viewer, what will we see? So the universal viewer doesn't show annotations, but one thing it does support, and Mirador 2 does as well, but I haven't configured it on this instance, is the Search API, and we'll come back to that in a bit. But you won't be able to kind of turn on the annotations that you saw in Mirador. So just as an aside, looking at how we managed to do this, so we customized this open annotation format. So you can see the top bit is very similar. The simple annotation server adds this created date, which is part of the open annotation model, just to say when the annotation was created. And the reason we did this is we wanted to create a graph over time to see how quickly the resource was being annotated. On the resource part, we chose a format of text HTML, and then we had the annotation body as this, and I'll go into more detail at that below. This on is similar to what you saw before, but it's been expanded. So we have the full, which is the canvas, and then the X, Y, width, height is here in a fragment selector. So this could be all compacted into just a single URL. But in this version of Mirador and Simple Annotation Server, it kind of expands it into this specific resource. And looking more closely at the annotation body, this is what you'd see. So we have a span for the rank, a span for the person's name, a span for the unit, and a span for the property. And this is a format called RDFA, which is a way of kind of hiding linked data in HTML. And that's what we were looking at to get the volunteers to transcribe the content. Firstly, to create the text, but also they'd also be creating a database that we could open for people to search and query. And having a look at the data, I've taken this and I put it into a linked data store and done some queries on it. And one of the things that some of the earlier pages gave was not only their name and rank, but also their location, where they were known to be from. And if you put them on a map, this is what you get. And this matches pretty much the population centres in Wales as it is in the moment, with the south of Wales being heavily populated, and then more of the mid sort of areas being much more sparsely populated. And I'm just about here, which is very unpopulated, but has many chickens. And also it includes things not just in Wales, so there's also London, Manchester, North Wales. So it does seem to match. It's kind of very spread out across Wales. And then also you can look, there's one section on Welsh sailors that lost their lives. And you can see the biggest numbers of people was indefatigable, and that was 41. And you can actually see that a lot of sailors lost their life during the Jutland actions, and that clearly comes out looking at the data. One particular one I thought was interesting was this Canningian ship, where unfortunately 10 people lost their lives, and this was a merchant ship. And doing a bit more research, you can find the list of sailors that match the book, and also this newspaper article from the National Library of Wales, which talks about this mining ship which hit a mine, I think it was off Liverpool, and there's another story there. And if you want to get access to it, you can see the full list of actions, annotations there. But this kind of project can be really powerful in that it really involves people into your collections and gets them to really kind of interact with it. It produces a full text searchable service, which I'm going to show you now. But then it also creates this research data, which you can then visualize and look at different ways. So it really hits all different areas. So we looked at this in the Universal Viewer. And one of the things it has is this search keyword. So if I go back to the annotation I made, this particular manifest is linked to this annotation server that we've been using. So as soon as you finished your annotation, it updated the search service. So hopefully, if I search for what I just transcribed, I'll keep my fingers crossed here. So I'll tell you what would have happened. So what happens when you do a search? Lots of bubbles appear on this line. And if you click one of those lines, it takes you straight to the page that has your search results and then highlights the word or the instance, the annotation that was discovered using this search. I can probably show you the live version. So this is a live version which points to the one that was all transcribed by volunteers. And if I search for Cardiff, you'll see that every instance of Cardiff ends up in a speech bubble here. And if I click on one of those, you can see it's highlighted Cardiff here. And this is using the IIIF Search API. And if you want to have a look at the details, if we look at this manifest here, you can see it's got this service at the top. And it has this profile and this particular link here, which says, it's a IIIF search. So when a client sees this, it knows how to interact with it. And then it's got this ID, which is the search service. So if we go and have a look at this ID, so I haven't given it any parameters. And so what it's done so far is just search for every single annotation in the book. And you can see there are 277. But one parameter that we can use is the Q parameter, which is a query. And if I search for Cardiff, now every annotation that returns Cardiff is returned. And you can see it's very similar to the annotations we've already looked at. So you've got the top bit, which is part of the annotation. You've got the resource, which is the body, which in this case is this HTML RDFA text. And then you've got the on, which is the target, the canvas, and then the region of the canvas, which is highlighted by that word. You can see if you click through here, I should actually go to the latest one, which is 1.0. And the query parameters. Search. There aren't many search parameters. So what you can search for is Q, which is this kind of full text search. There's a motivation, so we can search for all commenting. You wouldn't find painting motivations this way. You would only search for commenting the other types of annotations. A date range, which the simple annotation server doesn't support, but potentially you could do created before or after a certain date. And also another thing that simple annotation server doesn't support is user. So you could search for a particular user's annotation. But I think only the Q is supported in the universal viewer. Mirador may support the other ones, I'm not sure. But the Q one is the one that's most used. And that's what gives this kind of search interface here. And the Search API was very much intended to replace the kind of PDF search within. So it's not really meant to be a kind of a proper metadata search. It's only for searching annotations within an object. So have I missed any questions? Great. So next we're going to go on to commenting your own manifests. So we've got about 15 minutes left. What I might do is try and do this live, and then hopefully you can watch the recording and ask questions on the Slack if you want to do it yourself. From this point on, it gets kind of more and more complicated the more you want to do. But I'm always open for help if you've got any questions. So step one, we're going to load your own manifest into Mirador. So you should have created this. I think you created this localhost 887 manifest 2 yesterday in Mike's workshop. So I'm going to go to the root. So you'll be able to click on this link as well. I'm going to go to add item. I'm then going to paste my manifest URL into this add new object. I'm going to click load. And this does take a bit. And I think it's because the archive image server isn't the fastest. But if I click on there, so when this is loaded, I'm going to start annotating by clicking the speech bubble. And I will draw a rectangle on this when it arrives. Great. So maybe I want to try to zoom in, but yeah. Annotate these particular flowers. Maybe I want to. So I've created these two annotations. Next step is to download them. So what we're going to do in this one is, now I've annotated it, I want to download them and link them to my manifest. So this is when I was talking about creating this kind of read-only version. So if you want read-write on annotations, you've got to use an annotation store. But if you want read-only annotations, you can link to them from the manifest. And as long as that manifest has got that link, if you take that manifest to any version of Mirador, I think 2 or version 3, they will read your annotations and display them. So now that I've annotated these two different annotations, I want to download them from the annotation store and store them with my manifest. So I'm going to use this link. And this link gives you a list to all of the pages of annotation, so all the canvases that have been annotated. So I've got to find my canvas. So I'm going to go up. I'm going to get my manifest. I'm going to open that in the new link. So this is my manifest. It's on my local host, and I commented on the first canvas. So this is the first canvas, and I can see this identifier here. And if I copy this, and if I search here, and make sure I get rid of that speech mark, I can see that this canvas is the annotation that I made. So I'm going to click that and just double check. There are nice flowers. So this is definitely the one that I did. Now I'm going to download the annotations. So I'm going to save this. Sometimes if you do save page as, if you've got this kind of JSON coloring, it will save it incorrectly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to view the source, page source, and I'm going to save that. So this is my directory where I'm storing my manifest2.json, and this is where I've connected my Chrome web server to here. Let's just do a new Finder window, and then downloads, and it's this. So I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to rename it annotations1.json. Okay, so that. I'm now going to test it to make sure that it works. So I'm going to go to localhost 887. And I can see I've got annotations 1 here. So I click that and that's working great. Okay, so next I need to turn this annotation list into something that can be opened and linked to from another, can be linked to from a manifest. So I'm going to open up Atom. I'm going to go File, Open, and I'm going to open up my annotations. And it says I need to copy this to the front. So I'm going to copy this to the front. And just to check that this ID, I should be able to put this in the browser, and I should be able to get to the annotations list. And I can. It's not working quite right because I still got one more instruction to do. So in here it says also add this at the end of the file. So I'm going to do that. And then I can refresh this and it should be back. Great. So now we've got this annotation file, which is separate to our manifest, but we want to link them two together so that when you open the manifest, it brings along the annotations. So for this, I'm going to open up my annotation, my manifest. It's this one. So I need to find the canvas, and it was the first canvas, which is here. And it says to get the annotations display, you need to link them into the manifest. To do this, find the canvas your annotations point to, then add the following. So I'll copy this after the images array. So you can see that the images array is from here to here. So I'm going to paste this here. I'm going to save that. And you can see a full example of what it looks like there. So I've saved my manifest. I'm just going to double check that it's still valid JSON by checking it works there. And it's all green and black, so it looks okay. So now I can check if the annotations are showing. So this is another instance of Mirador that isn't connected to the annotation store. So if my annotations show up here, it's proved that they've been picked up from the manifest. So I'm going to open. So this is a version of Mirador. I need to paste in my manifest, which is this one, into add item. And this will take a few minutes. Oh, no. I'm going to click that and it's going to load. Just while that's loading, are there any questions? If we replicate this, do we need to have the server running like yesterday? Yes, so the Chrome plugin that you had running yesterday needs to be running for this. Would these be part of the manifest JSON file or a separate file? So you saw in here. So this is my Chrome web server directory, and they are separate files. So just delete these because they're confusing. So we've got the manifest2, this is the manifest, and the annotations1.json, which is a separate file. So these have now loaded, and the moment of truth, if I click this speech bubble, the annotations have come through. Nice flowers and path. So now I can share this manifest, and anybody that sees this manifest will see the annotations that I've created there. So you can see it's a bit of a convoluted process, and you know, this, I think it is really useful to go through it, because it is probably the best way to share read-only annotations, and it's kind of a bit of a model where you could take your manifest, load it into this hosted version of Simple Annotation Server, do your annotations, download the annotations, link them to the manifest, and then publish the manifest and the annotations as kind of a read-only exhibition instance in Mirador, so people can have a look through it. So that's what I was trying to do with that use case, this use case. Are there any questions before I just quickly introduce the second two bits? So the next bit I'm going to leave you as optional homework, and this is to install an annotation server locally. So the reason that you might want to do this is my hosted version of the annotation server is around for tutorials and things. So you're welcome to have a play around with it, but it's not really suitable for kind of production use or private use. So you might want to install an annotation server on your machine, so you can create these annotations and then download them from that and then do the published version. It requires the Java that we asked you to install for the Cantaloupe tutorial, so it's the same one as that. And then there's some steps about downloading the Simple Annotation Server and running some command line tools to get it running. The one thing this also adds is right at the bottom, it tells you how to link to the Search API. So you saw that example, which didn't quite come off here, still loading. But if you install the annotation server locally, you should be able to connect it to your annotation. So as soon as you've finished annotating, it should be available for search, and there are instructions to do this here. And then finally, this is just a link to various crowdsourcing solutions that are kind of built on this very similar technology, but in some cases are much more kind of specific for crowdsourcing. Mirador is much more for kind of researchers and research use, but there are some examples like the libcrowds. Digerati have also got a crowdsourcing system, which is much more set up for kind of mass crowd editing. And also there's From the Page, which we've got this guest presentation in an hour. And that's another great use case of annotations. And the real promise and excitement of the combination of IIIF annotations is this idea that you have your content available through IIIF or somebody else's content, and you can gather them together and give them to a crowdsourcing solution and kind of create this project relatively low cost. It's not quite as simple as that, but that's the promise that all this gives. So question, if you have your own store, do you need to repeat the same steps to add annotations.json file as we did for your hosted solution? Yes, so the creating and downloading, potentially you can link your manifest to the hosted annotation server, but as I mentioned here, this annotation server is open read write. So probably if you're going to open up to the public, you want to download the annotations. And once it's this annotation list here, it's read only, so you can't change it. So if I have different kinds of annotations, such as textual and diagrammatic, would I be able to let the viewer visualize each kind one at a time, either the textual or the diagrammatic, or would I have to add the same page twice and devote one to the textual and the other one to the diagrammatic ones? good question. So the annotation spec and the IIIF standard would definitely allow you to have in one annotation list two different types of annotations. You'd probably have different motivations to distinguish between textual and diagrammatic. And in theory, you would be able to turn one on, turn off. But unfortunately, the viewers don't support that. As far as I know, Mirador is the one that you normally kind of do this work with, and it will just show you all of the annotations. I don't think it has the functionality to turn one off and one on. But that's potentially something they're looking at in Mirador 3. There are this concept of layers of annotations. And so you might group all your textual annotations together in one layer and diagrammatic annotations in another layer, and then be able to turn them off and on. But at this moment in time, it'll just show all of them. And the workaround you suggest of having a separate image is another way of doing it, but not ideal, really. Any other final questions before I let you go? No? Okay, great. Well, thank you. There is that from the page demonstration. I think it's in an hour. Check the calendar to make sure. And that's a really good use case. That uses a lot of the annotation functionality we've looked at, but it's much more user-friendly. It does allow you to download the annotation list and link it to the manifest, so that's going to be quite similar. So I hope you enjoy that. Thank you.